Go ahead and get started. Please post any questions for those of you online in chat. Tiffany is monitoring those. I'll take questions from the audience here as you see it. When we start looking for money, there are 4 important questions that have to be addressed right away, and you see them on the screen here. The first one is you have to have done a little bit of planning or a business plan or something like that so you can determine how much money you need to borrow, or you need someone to invest in your business, or you need to self-fund. Generally, there are all kinds of uses of money, but in order to talk to lenders and real estate folks and to capsulize it down, I break it down into these 4 particular areas. If you're trying to buy a real estate, those of you who are existing businesses that might be trying to buy a building or something like that, that's a separate type of financing. It gets financed different for longer terms than other activities. The other time is many small businesses need equipment, and that equipment may have lead times or lengths of period that it is available to you before it becomes obsolete, and we can finance that separately if necessary. The big all-purpose category is working capital. So when you say, well, I need money for advertising and to pay salaries and office supplies and all of that, we group all of that by doing a business plan into an amount, and we call that working capital. And then the bottom 2 are lines of credit. Line of credit is really a specific purpose of financing. Usually banks will give a business a line of credit for a very specific purpose, and you use it for a year, you pay it up and down. You use it for the purpose, you get paid for that purpose, you pay it back down to 0, and then you use it again. The best example I can give you is I was in a business for a number of years. We had a line of credit that we used to fund salaries because our business was very seasonal. We actually were only in business 7 months of the year, and we used it to finance salaries. And when we started to do work, we used that to finance the payroll. Then when we got paid by our customer, we paid it back down to 0, and we just did it over and over again during the periods of time. So that's how a line of credit is used. For salaries, it can be used for inventory and things along those lines. And then gap financing gets into construction and real estate. What I want to talk to you most about today is the expectation of the lenders and of the investors, and what their expectation of you is in terms of underwriting requirements and in terms of their expected rates of return. It's important for you to understand that, because that will allow you to be predictive about your ability or how you will be able to raise money. And then we'll talk a little bit about the individual returns. I'm going to cover 5 areas today: grants, debt, equity, a combination of debt and equity, and bootstrap financing. Bootstrap financing is mostly for the for part-time businesses maybe that are in less than $40,000. That's sort of where I draw the line. That's kind of arbitrary. And we'll talk about those 3 in the middle there, because that's what the majority of people look at. And I'll be able to tell you a few stories. When we were working and putting this together, I went out and talked to 30 of my clients from the past, and they've allowed me to use individual stories without identifying their names and all of that sort of stuff. But these are real life stories. They actually happen in Hampton Roads, and it'll give you a feel for how creative all of you are and how some people have been in terms of financing their small business.
Yeah.
We'll start with grants. Okay. Sure.
They can't see yours, so I'm bringing it up right here, okay?
Hold on a minute. We have to stop for. So now you have to move the slides. Is that okay? Fair enough. So we'll ignore that. I'll just speak here. I guess hit the chat, those of you who are online, and make sure you can see the grant slide that we have up. We had a little snafu here. Yes, okay, very much. Thank you very much. So we'll start with grants. Everybody always wants to know about grants, because the theory is, and it's mostly correct, is if you can find them, okay, you don't have to pay them back, okay? So there's good news and bad news in that particular area. The good news is if you're a technology firm or you have a technology idea, there are a multitude of grants available at the federal government that you might be able to look into and you might be able to find. I also encourage all small businesses to keep track of their local departments of economic development because they occasionally run grant programs. We've had a lot of that actually in the past 2 or 3 years. I work in the Hampton Roads region from James City County and Williamsburg South to the peninsula and to the South Side area. So those are the departments of economic development I am principally referring to today. But for those of you here, your local economic development department is the department in the city where the business is located. Those are the folks that will cater to you in that regard. And I'm sure we have a couple of people with nonprofit ideas. Of course, you'll become intimately familiar with fundraising for nonprofits from individuals, from private foundations, and from government grant programs. Here's the bad news. Generally, what everybody would like, nobody has quite invented this yet, is a grant program that provides working capital and meets all of those kinds of needs. And generally, those are not available, okay? I used to tell people I was almost sure none of them were gradable, but we've had some interesting things over the past 2 or 3 years where grants have started to cover a little bit of working capital, small amounts, $5, $10, $30,000 is the largest I've ever seen. And you'll find that when you seek grants with these government agencies, you've got to align with what they want to do, okay, along with what you need. So for example, a technology business might want to develop a product. So you would want to find a government agency that's interested in those products and then be able to spend that money on both your development and meeting their individual needs. So you've got to see these grants as contracts that fulfill a purpose, and then you can proceed from there. There are lots of sources. The biggest by far is the Small Business Innovation Research Grant. It's specifically for small businesses. It has a very, very heavy technology bias or a science bias to it. But every single cabinet level department at the federal government has a SBIR program. At the state agencies, and I'm going to need to change this, we have a Center for Innovative Technology. They've actually just changed their name in the past couple of months to the Virginia Innovation Partnership Corporation, VIPC, no longer CIT, but that's where you seek out those kinds of opportunities at the state level. And then as we talked, local governments often have programs, principally for manufacturing and technology. But for example, we have a couple of cities in Hampton Roads that offer facade grants, offer small grants of $5,000 to develop your e-commerce or your website or things like that. You have to check with the individual cities to be able to do that, but you can go from that. And then I keep watching them every month because things seem to pop up from time to time in your local Department of Economic Development. It's worth a scan, okay, on Google to look for grants, okay? I like to see names like Norfolk State University, Cox, Verizon, those kinds of names behind it. What I would want you to avoid is the individual that says, send me $100 and I'll send you a list of grants that you'll be able to get to. Generally, someone should be as knowledgeable to me about the grant and be able to tell you whether or not you would be able to qualify ahead of time. So no upfront fees in searching for grants. We can go through this process and fund it itself. If you really get involved here, grants.gov, and there's an excellent subscription program, grantwatch.com. It's not an inexpensive subscription, but it can sort of give you knowledge of virtually everything out there that's able to do that. And if you're more mundane or you still do things like I do, like go to the local library, they often have the funding directories online that you can access. And we do have the Hampton Roads Community Foundation in the region that you can tap for those types of activities. Questions about grants or anything, because that's always one that people are interested in. And I want to say, yes, ma'am.
For grants, I know when you're looking for like traditional funding, you have to have a really solid kind of relationship with the bank, and then your financial documentation. Do a lot of the grants, are they asking for a lot of the same financial?
Sure. The question for those online is the paperwork necessary for grants? And grants is different than loans. I don't think you have to provide that. What you do with a grant is when you read what their requirements are, you simply provide that. I could tell you verbatim, I would think most banks would want 3 years of historical financials for the existing businesses in the room and online. For a startup, they would want 3 years of projections. A grant program may or may not ask for that. You'll just have to look at their individual requirements. So they'll be quite unique, and you'll simply have to respond to what their application process is. Fair enough? Very good. Give you a couple stories here. If and Tiffany has taught me well. Did that move everybody? It did. This just happened in the past year. This was a woman. We were constantly scouting for grants for childcare centers during the pandemic, and one of the local cities had a small grant program. It was for critical industries. Childcare was considered critical. It was one of the few that they would fund, and she made application and got a $10,000 grant for all-purpose uses. It really was all-purpose. It was a small amount. Highest amount was $10,000, and she got the max. But just to give you an idea for what that is, a firm that I worked with a number of years ago is a technology firm that actually developed a pre-GPS type of augmentation device. They actually used the SBIR program and went through all 3 phases. Were eventually able to get 7 figures of development, and they used almost all of that for product development because the agency they were working for, that's what they wanted. They wanted the product. So they didn't get to use a lot for salaries and things like that, but they went from there. They went through all 3 phases. They're still in existence today. A more recent one, not within literally the past couple of years, it was a professor out of academia of all sorts of things, had worked his life discovering a scientific process for a biological product. And he worked with the Department of Interior and was able to find a grant for $150,000 that actually funded most of the equipment for his lab, almost exactly what he needed. And that's what he put it in there. And then for all of you, and particularly for the existing businesses that are online or in the room, keep aware of these programs. You hear of all of these. Businesses get incentives and all of that sort of thing. Foreign train zones, job creations. Once again, your connection here is through your local Department of Economic Development, or it's through the State Department of Economic Development for Virginia. If you keep track of those, you will be in very good stead. So those are a couple of good examples. You can see the creativity and how wide the disparity of funding can be for grants. So they were on to debt. Yes, ma'am.
Going back to tech, this acronym SBIR stands for what?
I'm sorry?
SBIR stands for
Oh, Small Business Innovation Research Grant. Mm-hmm. And I guarantee if you hit that on the internet, it will show up big. But there are SBI programs in I think there are 16 cabinet level agencies. Every one of them, from the Department of Agriculture to the Department of Defense, has a program. Okay, so you might align that with what your business feels like. Fair enough. Yes, ma'am.
Can I share an experience?
Sure. Mm-hmm.
And sometimes with looking for the government grants, I'm a jewelry designer, so it's not necessarily a big area where they're like, we're looking for people to make jewelry, but I was able to get connect with someone who was doing an environmental program, and they received a grant from Environmental Services, or whoever, environmental EPA. And they actually were able to bring me in on the grant to help design some of the materials and things that went with the promotion of the event. So they were installing community gardens, and they brought me in to help design T-shirts and different things that people who were going to be working on the project were going to wear. So I wasn't necessarily with the actual grant. I didn't get awarded the grant, but I got work connected to the grant because
that's just excellent.
They were able to put it in. And so I just knew that from working with a department before, that those opportunities were there, but it was really a creative way. So people maybe are in an industry that don't necessarily connect. Maybe they have services that could be incorporated into someone else's application for a grant. So they don't get awarded it, but they can get business from it.
So you can see here, this is the creativity that all of you, it's why I'm working with entrepreneurs and small business owners. you have leveraged the capability. You're almost a subcontractor to someone who got a grant. And for those online as well, keep in mind, she got into the real details of the grant program and she found the opportunity within that. So it's not as easy as a simple Google search that says, you know, I want this. You really have to look at the grant programs and to figure out how you might be able to leverage them. And here you just have a great example of that. Fair enough? We're good online.
Mm-hmm.
So we're to debt. Now we're to loans, okay? And we shift from free money, if you will, to things that have to be paid back. And I'm going to want to make sure that you understand the underwriting criteria to determine if you are lendable. Now, remember, I'm about to give you some bad news on underwriting criteria, particularly for the startups in the room. But once you understand these criteria, remember, you can build your business with it. And we're going to talk about using private investors to do that a little bit later. Here are the best practices, particularly for startups or existing businesses. I want you to make sure that you have a banking relationship with an organization locally that gives access to the government loan programs. Government loan programs, with the exception of the pandemic programs, and all of those have ended now, okay? Actually, the government programs are accessed through the banks, and the banks get a guarantee if a government loan program will do that. It's important, not all banks do government loan programs. So you have to be able to find a bank that does that. And then I encourage people to make sure that they find the loan officers in the bank who are familiar with the program, because I've actually had some folks walk into folks that we know do SBA loans and things like that, but if they find a commercial loan officer who's not familiar with it, they might be told they don't do that. So make sure you do this, and this is a good long-term practice. When you're trying to figure out who to bank with for your business, let's try to make sure that we access a bank that will do government loan programs, so you always have that option. Government loan programs take a little bit more risk than the commercial sector, so I want you to have the maximum options available to you. There are plenty of online banks, by the way, that do this. I'm also going to talk about the non-bank government loan lenders. They're an option. We all know intuitively there are people out there that aren't banks, that aren't government loans, insurance companies that we know lend money to people. Okay, and I'm going to tell you, you access those mostly through the brokerage community, and we'll talk about them as well. And I want you to stay aware of these options, and I'm going to explain here in just a second what the cost of money is, because some of these take more risk, but as the risk goes up, your interest rate goes up, and I want to make sure that you're able to calculate your debt service in order to be able to make the decisions on whether or not it will work out for you. So these are the underwriting criteria. Those of you who are familiar with banks might have heard of the 5 C's of credit, but down the left-hand column here, you have the criteria that virtually all banks use to evaluate all types of loans, not just small businesses, but they proceed from there. Management, if you're a startup, you prove with a business plan. If you're an existing business, you prove with a business plan and with your historical performance. Repayability, we run those cash flow Excel timesheets and show that we can afford to repay the loan that we're asking for, okay? They'll run a credit check, and then here are the tough two, equity and collateral. Equity is the amount of money that you bring to the table, or you and your private investors bring to the table. There are any number of ways to calculate this. I like to use a debt to equity ratio. Banks will give you this much money if you have this much money invested, for example, is simple. There's several ways they do this, but it's always been easy and worked for me to work with small business owners to determine that. And then there's collateral. Here's your bad news. Collateral is the secondary source of repayment for a loan. So you write your business plan, you go into the bank, you calculate the debt service, and you're an entrepreneur or you're an existing successful business, okay? And you walk into the bank and you tell them you want to borrow this much money, and you give them a business plan and they understand that you're making some investment on your own. And then they ask you the question, well, what happens if this doesn't work out? That's just the worst question in the world to ask an entrepreneur. The only answer the banks and debt lenders want to hear is that there's collateral or a secondary source of repayment for the loan, okay? And generally, if you're an existing business, you may have a balance sheet that can be used for collateral. Okay, if you're a startup, you generally are going to be using your personal financial resources and putting your personal life at risk. So that's not a risk not worth taking, but it's certainly one worth evaluating. Okay, and that's what I want to make sure everybody understands. You'll see down there in black then the cost of the money. By and large, banks are the low cost alternative for small business folks. If they lend you money, they will lend you money at prime. It's your loan agreement would be quoted at prime plus 0.5 to 2 points over prime. So you can see you can calculate your debt service. The major question with banks, as you can determine, is whether or not they will lend you the money. But if you can qualify for bank financing, it's probably the best deal that you can come up with. Government loan programs, remember, you access through the bank. Bank determines you're more risk than we want to take, so they submit your loan to the SBA, okay, or to another government loan program. And if the government approves, the government issues a guarantee to the bank. So that's what's in it for the bank. And you can see here, the government loans take a little bit more risk, higher debt to equity ratios. They really will tell you they want 100% collateral, but they might value the collateral you bring to the table more judiciously or a little bit less conservatively than a bank might do. So you can see they still want a fair amount of collateral. And then there are the non-bank lending sources. Once again, equity now becomes variable. There are non-bank lenders that take considerable risk, but they charge you, as you can see down there in the bank. You know, now we have graduated from 2 points above prime and 2 3/4 to 3 to 7 or 8 points above the prime. So they're really saying, okay, we'll take less equity and collateral, but we're going to charge you an interest rate to be able to do that. That's not entirely bad. If you can qualify for bank or government loans, that's where I want you to go because your cost of money will be less. Okay. But if you use a non-bank lending source and you get into a higher interest level, I want to be able to run that cash flow statement and be sure that you can still afford to repay the loan. Sometimes the higher interest rates will shift you into that category. Okay. So that's debt in its element with the underwriting criteria that apply. The sources are pretty straightforward. As I said, banks are generally the low-cost alternative. Without a doubt, the most dominant small business lending program is the SBA 7(a) program. That is because it is the largest. It's the one most of the banks are familiar with, and it does virtually everything. It can be used for real estate and construction, although there's a better deal on the table than that. But it can be used for working capital and all purposes. For the existing businesses in the room, some of these loans get up into the $2 and $3 million range. So it covers a lot of activity. Just in case we have some folks on board, the existing businesses that are trying to buy a piece of real estate, I always highlight the 504 program. It's an SBA program specifically for real estate and for equipment. It will not do working capital, but it only requires a 10% down payment. So it's a very, very good deal to preserve working capital for other purposes for growing small businesses. And then there are export programs. The state has a Virginia Small Business Financing Authority that actually mirrors the government programs and has a couple of specialty microloan and childcare programs. And then once again, I come back to your local Department of Economic Development. Many of them have smaller loan programs. These are loan programs that generally don't get much beyond $100,000 in terms of their maximum amount. But once again, wherever your business is located, if you keep track, if you are aware of the SBA and the federal programs, you keep track of the Virginia Small Business Financing Authority, and you check periodically, maybe once a month with your local Department of Economic Development, you'll know what your sources can be. Fair enough? The non-bank financing sources, you may have heard. Once again, insurance firms, there are all sorts of commercial finance firms who have an office in one great big city. They operate through brokers. So you access these folks through brokers in the region. We actually have 2 or 3 good ones in Hampton Roads. Leasing firms, okay, that do equipment are an option. Accounts receivable firms, I'll give you an example of that where you actually, for those of you who are government contractors, or going into government work. Accounts receivables are an asset that can be leveraged for financing. And then you have all the typical types we've already talked about: working capital, real estate, commercial, and asset-based financing organizations. A couple of stories. This firm still exists to the day, and I went back and talked to Ed, he's 18 years old when I talked to him to put this together about 6 months ago. When he started out, he needed $73,000. I'd done a business plan with him. He needed $73,000 to finance his initial inventory and some working capital. Okay, he was leaving the military in Hampton Roads, and he had $25,000 to invest. So you can see he was not at a 2-to-1 debt to equity ratio. He was more like 3 to 4 to 1. We approached the bank. He was more risk than they wanted to take. They submitted it to the SBA, and the SBA approved the loan. Okay, and he exists to this day. He's actually done quite well. He has grown from a showroom, which is what he did the first time, and now he does that and he sells a product online. But you can see the $25,000 brought him in as a startup to the ability to be able to finance the loan. He did have to personally sign for the loan. That obviously has worked out quite well for his firm. The 504 Pro, this is for the existing businesses here or online. If you need real estate and development, the 504 program is there. This is a firm that just a few years ago had some real unique space needs, and they wanted to gain control of their rent. They were in a commercial leasing situation, and the rent kept going up year after year, as it often does, and they wanted to control that expense. They were profitable, they had some growth, and they had some cash, but they needed that cash for a lot of other elements. And if you go seek out real estate, you will find out that generally banks want you to put 20 to 30% down. The 504 program only wants you to put 10% down. And that was perfect for him. It allowed them to be able to finance their business using only 10% down. They built a new building, and you can see that was the size of the deal. Turned into just shy of a $1.4 million deal, and they are an existing business. I always worry about this one that you might be able to guess who it is, but that's a good story there. Non-bank lenders, contractor, caulking contractor, walked into the SBDC, and he was doing just well. And all of a sudden, he had a couple of new customers walk in, and he had a growth spurt. Went to the bank to get the money. The bank said no. Okay. It turns out that when we did the business plan, he needed $56,000 for equipment and a truck. That's what he needed. He just needed to expand one individual. And in his particular case, we looked at a non-bank lender. He called his commercial insurance agent, who introduced him to the lending side of the insurance company, and they funded him, and he is still in business to this day. And why I remember this one is we had to have this in 30 days because the work was starting. So it was a weekend writing a business plan and doing the projections, but he actually found an insurance firm to finance the small amount of growth that he wanted. And then for those of you in government contracting, accounts receivable financing. Here's a great story, and I can tell you this story is not unique. I've had it happen to me 10 or 15 times in my career. Government contractor who is successful walks in, goes to the bank, gets their first loan. Everything is great, okay? Then they go home a month later, and new business walks in the door. Not a bad thing, but it has its own issue. He now needs more capital to finance his business. What's the first thing he thinks of? I just got a bank loan. I'll walk back into the bank and ask him to increase my line, which he did. And guess what the answer was? The answer was they didn't want to do that just yet. He had exceeded the risk parameters for those underwriting criteria, okay? In this particular case, we engaged in accounts receivable financing. They're also called factorers. And the owner actually went in, and as he completed the work, he would sell that receivable to the factorer. The factorer would give him working capital to be able to do that, okay? We did a projection. Factoring is more expensive than a bank loan, and he did that for a year. grew 20% that year, and then a year later walked back in to renew his loan with his bank, and they saw what he had done with his receivable firm and simply increased his line to that amount, which reduced the debt service, and the accounts receivable firm went away. I've done this with more government contractors than I care to tell you. So I'm sure we have some of those online or in the room, and I don't want to look there. But that's a good example of that. And we have a couple of very good accounts receivable firms in the Hampton Roads region. So debt, we cross over into equity. So now what happens with equity is we cross the line from debt, where you are simply have to have an agreement and repay the loan, to where ownership becomes a discussion, okay? This has good news and bad news. The idea behind equity is you engage outside investments, and they make their money by getting paid from the profits of the business. So you get an ability to be able to grow. It avoids monthly debt service. You can see ownership can produce upside. I've been an investor in a couple of businesses like this. And obviously, if the business grows and I own 10 or 13% of the business, I get those profits whenever they are paid out. Okay, so it has upside for the investor. But the owner, the original owner or the founder, has to be willing to give up ownership. There are a variety of ways for them to get paid, and we can talk about those when we're through there. My best practices for these kinds of courses and things like that is, I don't want you to go out and just raise equity. I want you to raise enough equity to where you can leverage debt loans and fall within those debt to equity ratios, because it means you will give up less ownership, and that your firm's value, as it increases over time, will accrue to you. Generally, too, when you go out to outside teams, management teams are necessary here. So technology startups like are done at the innovation centers. You need a team here because an investor wants to know all of the areas are covered. Generally, equity is not a good option for those of you that want to operate as one-person operations. There's nothing wrong with being a solopreneur, okay, but there is, it's not a real good source for equity. Those of you who have a sizable market idea, something that's very, very large, you're not going to meet those underwriting criteria, okay, for debt loans, might have to seek and put together a business plan to be able to raise equity financing. And then what's really helpful is these barrier to entries or intellectual property. If you've got something that's protectable, that keeps competition at bay for some amount of time, that will work out there. And then just remember, this is not Bill Holloran's rule. This is Mr. McLaughlin's rule that I was taught 30 years ago. Everything works out in equity when everybody makes money. So remember, you're taking on partners. They are financially engaged, and you'll want to be able to do that. Here's the good and the bad news. The good news with equity is credit, equity, and collateral go away, okay? They're not doing underwriting analysis like a bank or anything along those lines. They are simply wondering about whether or not you can manage and repay them at some point in the future. So really the business plan and the management team are the right of entry to be able to do that. And generally you're selling ownership or stock or membership rights if you're an LLC in your business in order to secure this type of financing. And generally you don't repay it right away. Okay, you get years to be able to operate there. Most investors are hoping for an exit strategy, maybe a dividend payout. We all hope somewhere in Hampton Roads we'll create an IPO someday. So those are the things that are usually there. And then you see the gambit of equity financing. You know those articles that say never deal with family, friends, and relatives? They're wrong, okay? There's been more capital raised in equity in that by small business folks from their family, friends, and relatives than almost any of these other resources. Crowdsourcing, I have to put up there because those of you online or here would say you left out crowdsourcing, and you'd be right. I'm really trying to make a study of that to get it down to a process. It's wide open on the internet right now, but it can be an option. It's particularly an option for those of you who have nonprofits online or things like that. That's reality. Trying to raise money as an ongoing for-profit business is still a bit of a wild area for crowdsourcing. There are private investors, they call them angels, okay? And there are angel capital funds and there are angel networks. We have one in Hampton Roads. It's called 757 Angels. And there are any number of private investors. There are at least 200, if you believe that group, and that tells me there are probably 4 or 5 more. You have to hunt for them, okay, and find your way to them to be able to do that. The SBA runs government contract equity programs. SBIC, unfortunately, we don't want to have one in Hampton Roads. There is one in Northern Virginia. It's my job to work on that. Then you've heard of venture capital funds. Venture capital funds are the Silicon Valley firms that fund the next Google or Facebook. We don't have any in the area, but we certainly have plenty on the East Coast between the Research Triangle and the city of Philadelphia. You can get access to these folks, but you need an industry creating idea. These folks are not looking for, they're not looking for the next floral business. If that is the kind of thing you want to operate, they're looking for someone who wants to take over the floral industry. Okay, the word is disruption is what they're looking for. These are the folks that fund the Ubers and the AirNibs and all of that sort of stuff in the world. And then for our existing businesses online in here, don't forget the private equity markets. Private equity generally doesn't deal with startups, but they will fund growth in small businesses. I was in a small business that tapped this market. You actually get to go up to Wall Street in Boston and such places and tour the city and introduce yourself to these folks. And over time, if they like your idea, they will consider it. They're looking for growth though. Not as much as venture capital funds, although they would tell you they would like that, but private equity is specifically for existing businesses. They take less risk because they can look at the historical performance of the firm. They're your sources. We've contacted all of those. Sure.
Question.
I'm sorry.
Can you, so if VCs are looking for, scalable, huge companies that are trying to take over a particular industry, will angel investors invest in a floral company?
Yes, actually, and let's hope, Tiffany, if I could go backwards, it's a very good question. So every one of these, there's a term every one of these folks, I think you have to have an internal rate of return of 15 to 20%. That's my training. The training says that what all of us can do with our money is we can put our money in money market funds and make 1%, maybe 2%. Now that the Federal Reserve is increasing rates, we could put it in bonds, we could put it in stocks and mutual funds, and we could go get that money. And in a good year, stocks might return 10, 15. There have been years when it's been as high as 20%. Okay. A startup business or an existing small business starting to grow is the next level of risk beyond that, because you need this money and I can't walk in and have you write a check 3 months after I give you the money like I can if I invest it in a stock. So it's that next level of risk. And I always tell folks that you need to be able to show a 15 to 20% rate of return so the investor can see that they will get something back. That's private investors and family, friends, and relatives. Family, friends, and relatives do a lot of things without factoring in internal rates of return and things like that. But when I work with a small business that wants to raise equity funds, I'm going to show you how to, there's no magic to it, how to calculate an internal rate of return if you hit your projections that you can show a projector. Now, private investors and angels, I think, are in the same category. When we get to venture capital firms, the best term I've ever heard was industry creating. They're looking for something that's going to go from zero and we're going to read in the newspapers someday in the future, okay? Maybe not even the paper. There are plenty of venture capital funded businesses that are firms we have never heard of. They're not all Google and Facebook that have done just fine and paid off okay for the venture capital firm, but they're looking for big hits. And the reason for that is they take considerable risk and they fail a lot. A lot of these firms fail, but their big hits cover all of those bets. Private equity firms, I have sat in front of more of these than I can tell you for 3 years of my life. And they always talk about 10 baggers. So in our case, we wanted to borrow $5 million. It was to get to our next level of growth. they wanted to know that that 5 million was going to be able to grow into 50 million before they cashed out or we exited. And it worked. Okay, we were able to grow a $300 million firm into a $1.2 billion firm. So you can get that internal rate of return. And they always use terms like 10 bagger and all of that sort of stuff, but they would have been fine with 15 to 20%. Okay, so considerable buy. And remember, that's coming out of profits and free cash flow. So that's my best gauge of the range that you can deal with. Fair enough?
Mhm.
Good there. Okay. Couple stories. Just in the past 5 years, retail operation came to me, needed $300,000 to start the operation, and had raised $200,000 from their family. Okay, took them to the bank. Bank didn't care. They didn't like the type of business. Okay, there was nothing wrong with the business. Inherently, they just weren't comfortable with the collateral and all of that sort of stuff. He still needed $100,000, and he didn't want to give up any more ownership than he had already given up. So we found a private investor who did a $100,000 deal with him, didn't take ownership, but did a debt deal with him, signed a note. Okay, he pledged a particular part of his inventory to cover it for collateral. And in this case, the interest rate was 10%. Okay, ran the cash flow, he could afford that. And that's how he accomplished that. He's successful, actually come through the pandemic. And he's considering online. Actually, he's done his second store and he's on to his third store. So you can see how creative, like you were talking earlier, how creative you can get mixing and matching these depending upon your situation. This was a 3-person operation, a financing type firm, and I can't tell you more than that because then you would guess who they were. But they actually brought in a wealthy family member. What they wanted was a line of credit, okay, to finance a particular line of their business. And they did this at startup and were then able to get financing from the bank for the line of credit, okay, because they brought the equity into the equation. I show you these 2 examples because you can see if you can raise a little bit of equity, you might be able to do it. And then, of course, in Chris and Arlene's situation, they got more. They got very creative about how to raise the additional $100,000. And then you can see down here, real estate. This was actually a contractor just in the past 2 years, had been doing very, very well. And then he wanted to rehab houses. He actually knew where to go find investment money, but he just needed $100,000. It wasn't a large amount of money. The banks weren't very interested. He went and found an investor who gave him a debt deal, and they financed 1 rehab house at a time. So he has his standard business and he's growing into the rehab business and still trying to decide whether he's eventually going to be a landlord or not. So you can see very, very simple element, but rather than raising equity, he didn't really want to get into ownership, and it would have cost him a lot in paperwork to do that. So he paid a little higher interest rate to get access to the money, and he knows how quickly he has to rehab houses, and he's pretty good at it to be able to do that. And I think we can do that. So that's equity, okay? So you can see you've got grants, you've got debt, you've got equity, and you've got debt and equity in the combination. Debt and equity can work together depending upon your situation. I know that online and maybe in the room here, we have some small businesses, part-time businesses, or folks that are solo entrepreneurs. These are bootstrap financing. Bootstrap financing is the story that we all read the newspaper 5 years after someone's success. But in its end, what this is people taking little amounts of money. They probably need more to start their business, but then they start operating very quickly and they get their business to profitability, usually within 1 to 6 months. And those profits they reinvest, and it covers the deficit that they had at the start. And I have just seen folks like you work money here. You do have to know the cost of money. This works best for individual projects, not all-purpose working capital, but it can be. And keep in mind, all of these can be collateral for your larger debt financing organization. So I don't want one of these to be bootstrapped when you could have used it for collateral and got a larger loan. Here are the sources. Home equity loans. If you own a home and you have any equity, you can certainly leverage that. Suppliers, I've got a great story. I watched a woman whose name is not Jennifer. It is on the slide. I'll do that. I have seen innumerable folks start out with a project and get a customer to pay them up front right away, pre-delivery, and that was the working capital they were able to move forward with. Credit unions and banks, of course, do personal loans. Okay, so you might be able to get a personal loan based on a long-term relationship. If you have cash value life insurance, you can look at that and see if there's any money in that. Brokerage accounts can be tapped. Retirement funds as well. You'll see here in a minute with the example I've used. I have a real bias with retirement funds. I want you to use those for 59-day needs or less because I don't want you to pay the tax penalty of tapping your retirement funds. One thing that all the financial planners tell me, though, some retirement funds allow you to borrow loans outside of that and just get that, and you don't have to suffer that penalty. So that is an option. And then we have the consumer finance firms and the credit cards. Now we start getting into the area of high credit debt, okay, of high interest debt. And I want to make sure you do that. And microloans, as my friend here knows, we don't have a great microloan program in the area, and we need to work on that. So a couple real stories. Firm guy that builds equipment, customer manufacturer, part-time business where he works full-time job and he does $100,000 on the side. Okay, to this day. He financed his first order by tapping that retirement fund. He needed money for the equipment once he got the order. He tapped his retirement fund. He replenished it on day 58. I remembered that. And he built and got his equipment and then sold it and got paid for the customer. Did that several times over his first couple of years of business. Then he discovered, I wish I would have told him this up front, I just didn't think of it at the time, that he could get a loan out of his retirement fund. That's eventually what he used for his part-time business. Now the business is self-sufficient. But over the years, he's done just around $100,000 a year. The business threw off $30,000 in profit. He has used it to fund college and retirement efforts for him and his wife. So he was building funds for kids to go to school. Credit cards. I don't have any problem with people using credit cards, okay? And occasionally credit cards come along where you can get cash at reasonable interest rates. It's usually for an introductory period or something along those lines. But generally, I want you to be aware that this is an area of 12 to 19% interest rates, and that adds up in a hurry. Now I want to run the cash flow statement with you and make sure that we can afford that debt service, okay? And credit cards at their best, they're nothing more than a revolving line of credit, just like a bank might give you for our salaries when we were at Atlantic a number of years ago. So if you can get a 30 to 60 day cycle going, this is an excellent. Credit cards are easy access, okay? Usually sums from $1,000 to $25,000 because you're trying to get the cash element. You might have a much higher credit card element, but generally they won't let you borrow all of that cash at one element. So you have to read the fine print. I have seen any number of small businesses do this very successfully. What I want to avoid is the credit card at 19% that you're not going to pay back for 2 years. Okay. Generally, when I run the interest rate on that, the debt service starts to erase any profits you might have. So I just want to take that into account. That's why we do a business plan and why we do projections, because we'll be able to be predictive about that. I have seen numerous full-time businesses use credit cards as a revolving line of credit, do it for a year or two until the banks said, hey, gee, they're running a pretty good operation here. We'll give them a traditional line, and they go back and get a number. I've seen any number of startups who couldn't qualify for whatever reason, good, bad, or indifferent, from the banks. And they did this for a couple of years in order to fund their business. And then they graduated to bank financing over time, usually with the same bank that was extending them the credit card. Okay, so that's there. And then Jennifer, this is not her real name. She made me change her name, but I always call her Jennifer now. This was just supplier financing on steroids. She started it was a retail services firm. It had a retail component, and she provided an interesting service. And we did her business plan, and she needed $47,000 to start, and she had a very modest amount of money. I think it was $3,000 or $4,000, just didn't have enough, and we knew that, okay? She looked at her inventory line item, and she went out and negotiated with 4 suppliers. Every one of them, she actually had 5 suppliers, one of them said no, okay? And she got 60 to 90-day terms from those suppliers. That financed her inventory, it came in, she made sure, she's one of these folks that can sell, you know, iced Eskimos and all that sort of stuff. She went in and turned her product fast enough to repay those suppliers in that time frame. She did this for almost 1.5 to 2 years, okay, until the business was throwing off enough profits to be able to do it. Just as innovative and as energetic as you can imagine. And that was getting terms from her suppliers. So she got short-term loans from them to finance her inventory. And then she just made sure she turned the sales in a 60 to 90-day period to be able to do that. So very entrepreneurial, and she's still out there today. So those are the 5 things: grants, debt, equity, combination of debt and equity. I like yours, combination debt, equity, and grants. Okay, that's even better. I'm probably going to change this and make that way next time. And then, of course, bootstrap financing for the part-time businesses.